So I kind of ran into this problem this year. I planted a lot of zucchini. So I normally do like 1 or 2 plants of zucchini, maybe one of the black beauty and one of the yellow. But I had so much extra space over here, I just started planting seeds, and I said to myself, I will just come through and thin it. And then I never came through and thinned it. So now I have a lot of zucchini plants, and something that I had seen online to help trellis them was using tomato cages. So I'm going to show you that. So here shows the tomato cages with the zucchinis. I just brought the leaves up through the cage, and what this will help, besides just laying over on top of all the other plants surrounding it, is more airflow, and it actually is a lot easier for me to get in here and see if there's zucchini. I can help pollinate, like I'm going to help pollinate these couple of flowers once I'm done videoing. And then additionally, it'll help me be able to prune as I was to shape this up along the vine. So as you can see, one of them here that I have been pruning looks a lot better than the one next to it that I haven't started pruning. And the problem I have going on here is actually this was 2 plants, and I probably should pull one out, but at this point I'm just gonna prune it down like crazy. Hope that works, because they're just both so intertwined with each other now. It's gonna be difficult to take one out without damaging the other. I'm gonna finish coming through here and pruning these out and getting some good airflow into those zucchini plants. You can just see such a big difference with the accessibility. So now you can see that I came through and I pruned all of the zucchini plants, and they look a lot better. I have a lot more airflow. I was able to go through and pollinate the couple of female flowers that I saw. If you guys have been growing zucchini and you've never been pruning your vine, you really need to start doing it, because you can see a great example here how it grows along this center vine, and all those other little zucchinis along it are gonna keep popping out, and all of these other leaves that are on the back of the new fruit production, that's all just wasting energy from the plant. So it's important to get rid of that. Get rid of all these leaves that aren't helping it anymore. It's just taking away more energy, and we want it to go into fruit production. And you just come in and you clip them down close to the base. You can tear it. I do prefer clipping them because it's easier, and it leaves a better, it leaves a nice cleaner bit on the base of the vine. So as it continues to grow, you'll just keep on getting rid of all of these other leaves that are not helping with the vine's production anymore. And it helps the airflow, it helps you be able to access all of these fruits better. It's going to be so much easier for me to come in here and pollinate all of these guys and harvest them, of course. So, welcome to the end of June. The end of June has arrived, and my garden is prolific. We just had a exceptionally warm, unseasonably warm couple of days here. We set records with heat. It was like 108. Other places were hotter. It was very difficult to manage, and this week we're gonna still be in some higher temperatures. So unfortunately that means that there's been some damage to my garden, particularly with some of the cooler weather loving things. But it has been really helpful for some of the other parts of the garden. This is my winter squash patch. I also have some peppers in here and some watermelon vines that are getting totally overcovered by the squash. So I actually just harvested some onions yesterday from the fenced-in garden, and I'm thinking I'm going to transplant. It's a little scary this time of year to transplant them, but I think I'm going to transplant my melons, which includes some cantaloupe and some watermelon, and they'll actually be in one of my sunnier beds, so I think it'll really help those plants out. Right now they're just getting overtaken daily by the squash here. Now, as I mentioned with the zucchini, a type of summer squash, it's really good to come through and prune those down to the vine. I actually never did that with the winter squash last year. I had it in a different spot and it was really easy for all of it to just go right up a trellis, which was actually the fence. And I was thinking I was just going to leave it and just let it kind of explode over here. But being as it is turning into a little bit of a mess already so early on, and it's only just starting to vine up one side of the trellis, I think I'm going to come through here and trim down some of these leaves again. And I'm trying to think of another trellising system to help bring these outer plants up over that way, or to add some sort of other trellis where it can come over into the grass over here, which would work out fine. Like I started directing the vines to just come out off of the bed, but we do go through and mow here, and I would like to have the squash up off the ground. So before you see the end of July video tour, you might see that something is a little bit different going on over here. The last couple things that I'll share over here is just that the pole beans are really coming up the trellis very nicely. I'm really happy with that. And in this bed, I also got some leeks that I planted. I actually have them just everywhere throughout the garden spaces now. Planted a whole bunch of leeks. Here's that watermelon. Actually, there's 2 in here that I was saying I need to transplant. It's just getting really overtaken by the winter squash. Here's my couple of eggplants outside of the garden. They were looking really rough, and I just kept on pruning the bad leaves coming off and watering it and keeping an eye on it. It had flowered, and then nothing ended up happening with the flowers, but they're finally looking like they're doing a little bit better. And then I planted some more Walla Walla onions around the outsides of all 3 of these beds outside of the garden. The cucumber starting to trellis up. I'm using my fence surrounding the garden again as a trellis, also for the tomatoes that's inside of there. So shortly we should be getting some cucumbers, hopefully. There's actually 3 plants in here. This one I just keep trying to redirect, but again, with the vining things and being a little overboard with how much I planted, might have to figure out something else creative for that. And then there's just some more onion sets all throughout. So let's head inside. I'm just eagerly waiting for my clematis to bloom. This is its 2nd year on the arbor, and you can see the crocosmias on the outside. They're sticking through the fence now too. They're starting to get a couple of little flower heads on them, so it shouldn't be long until I see those. I believe it's called red lucifer. They're really pretty, really crimson red crocosmias, so it'll be fun to see the entrance get all prettified. Quick little check-in on my last cauliflower head. It's looking good. I'm starting to lose its tightness, so I think I'm gonna have to harvest that today. All of this heat that we got, everything just started crazy bolting. Remember my Brussels sprouts? I just can't keep on top of trimming these back. They just keep on flowering and just continue to bolt, and here this one's actually flowering now. I don't know, I think that this attempt is just not gonna work out for getting Brussels sprouts to where they need to be. But I did find another package of them at the feed store, and so I started some back here in this empty bed, because this is where all of the garlic was. So hopefully planting them at this time of year will actually see them through to a first frost, which from what I've read and watched is actually really beneficial to the flavor. They taste really good once they've gone through a frost or 2. Now this empty space in the bed is where I harvested all of the onions. And I believe this is where I'm going to put those watermelons, and I can add another tiny trellis here or try and get it out towards the fence or the tomato trellis, but this is just too much wasted space in one of my sunniest beds. As I already have said, this bed is my perennial bed, my 2nd sunniest, and there's not a lot going on here because I planted asparagus and I've just been leaving it to do its own thing. As you can see, some of the asparagus had come through and they're flowering all ferny and everything. I'm just leaving it alone. I just noticed after all this heat, we have this big, huge guy that popped out of the ground. I believe I planted either 6 to 8 asparagus roots, bare roots in here. So they will be popping up in their own time. These were more of the leeks, like I said. I just surrounded this entire bed with more leeks, and that'll be available to harvest in the fall. You may have already noticed the artichokes are looking good. There's a lot of seeds that I had planted a bunch of, I think 2 whole rows of seeds of artichokes in here. Got discouraged because there was no life happening, and then I found these little half-gallon ones, planted them, and now after all this heat that we've been getting, and of course keeping it watered, I've got more kind of rogue plants popping up throughout. So we'll see what this looks like later on in the season. But the artichokes should provide a pretty decent fall crop. I have some more tomato plants over here. This one was, I believe, a ground cherry variety. And then these were all cherry types because Kevin really likes cherry tomatoes. And then back here is the green zebra. This brighter morning light now is making it a little bit hard to see as easily, but this is supposed to be a really pretty green with a purple stripe in it, and I'm excited to see how that's going to come about. I have some basil varieties. All of the potatoes are looking really prolific. I've actually had to cover some potatoes up that have been poking through the bags. I think I'm going to get close to harvesting these in maybe a couple more weeks, just waiting for them to flower and or brown over and topple over. I would like to be able to harvest these relatively quickly so I can re-sow seed potatoes in these grow bags and then have another harvest later on in the fall. I really am trying to maximize the growing time and get early season stuff done and then a second wave of it. Just like with the onions, this was all the onions that I pulled out, and now I have replaced all of them with some more sets that a friend gave me. And those are actually, I didn't have room in this garden for it, so they're out in my front flower bed lining the house. Hopefully that's a safe spot for them, but I figured it'll get a lot of sunlight. I can watch them really closely. I think part of what happened with this onion crop, you can see a lot of them aren't super big. They're more like golf ball range kind of size. There's a couple that are fairly decent in size. I've grown onions in the past, but not successfully. And I think part of my problem with these ones, number one, I planted them too deep, and I found that out too late in the season. And number two, I planted some of them too close together. I remember when I planted all of these, I was in a bit of a hurry to get them in the ground, and I didn't really have a dedicated space for it, and I had so many. If you've ever bought onion sets, you get a huge bundle of them. So that was additionally a problem. So this next wave that I'm doing, I'm going to try and ensure that I don't plant them too deep, and that they all got, when I put them in, they got about 6 inches apart from each other. So hopefully that worked out well. You can see from these that I had trimmed all the tops off a few weeks ago, and I already had started to get some more growth back on them. But that is supposed to help tell the plant to put more energy into the bulb before you decide to harvest. And it's funny how so many of them already started to grow back. So this little drying table I set up, this is just an old dog playpen. It's foldable, that's why it's able to sit like this. It's just on a couple buckets. They're only going to sit out here in the garden in filtered sunlight for 2 days, so it's been 1 day. And then I'm going to put them in where all the garlic is curing. And I actually just checked out the garlic yesterday, and it looks just about done. I harvested the last of the garlic that was ready at the same time that I pulled these onions out. So there is a couple of cloves that'll continue curing at the same time as the garlic. But the first wave of the garlic was all planted or pulled out 2 weeks ago, and it should be about ready. So I'm going to swap them out. I'm going to bring those into the house, and then these onions can sit and cure over there. The sun isn't so bad for the first day or two to really help it dry out. They actually look different than they did yesterday. But especially with all the heat that we got, I don't want them to sunburn. So they will continue to finish curing and have really good airflow, but out of direct sunlight after tomorrow. Speaking of the heat, these are my poor lettuce plants. I'm gonna harvest off the last of this romaine. I was gone for 2 days at a horse show when the start of the heat happened, and it just, oh my gosh, the romaine looks the worst. Although you can tell that the Buttercrisp it got really tall. It was really thinking about bolting. I've been doing a method of harvesting with them where you just pull all of the outer leaves off, and so it makes the center stalks get tall naturally anyway. But after all that heat, they just really got tall. I'm hoping, I think this romaine and probably these butter lettuces I can salvage. So I'm gonna harvest off of these today and do a taste test. Sometimes when it starts to get hot, lettuce starts to kind of get a little bit bitter in flavor. So hopefully these other ones that I'm gonna try and salvage will still be fairly edible and not too bitter, but they get just filtered sunlight here. So at least they're not in direct sun rays. But man, when it just doesn't leave 100 degrees for a couple days, it takes a toll on them. Even this morning, when lettuce would be looking really perky and nice, it still is just folded over, and even the texture to it feels just weak, I guess I could say. It just doesn't have that crisp feeling. It feels kind of just softer. So we'll see how well that does in the fridge. Try and get a couple more salads out of it. Yeah, so I've got snap peas and snow peas over here. These were looking nice. I think the heat kind of did something for them too. I'm gonna have to come through and help trellis them up onto here again. It kind of is turning into a little bit of a mess. But I've been able to harvest quite a bit off of that. I just do some handfuls at a time and throw it in the fridge. Eat them with some hummus. But I haven't seen any, on any of the tomato plants, I haven't seen any fruit yet, but it's a little early. I wouldn't have been surprised to see some with all that heat that we got, but there's still time. I usually don't have tomatoes till later July or August, so just the fact that each plant has some flowers on it is a good sign, and they're doing well coming up this trellis. I haven't needed to really prune them a whole lot anymore after the first couple of weeks of staying on top of it and helping it find its way up the trellis. That usually seems to be enough for the tomatoes to find their way. All right, so a little bit of the hot mess additionally going on over here. All these cabbage plants just have failed to form any sort of head. I mean, the leaves look great, and then you get a couple like this that are starting to look promising of a head forming, but they just aren't, they're not doing it. So I don't know, again, what's going on with them. I know sometimes you can get really great leaves and no head because it could be too high in nitrogen, but I actually didn't add compost to any of these beds this year because I add so much every year anyway, so I don't really think that it's necessarily too much nitrogen. I'm thinking maybe they don't get enough sun. With some of the research that I did, cabbage actually does like to have some sun. You can see that it does get some filtered sun here, but just not quite as direct rays. So I might be trying to find some more to plant here shortly so I can try and have them ready for fall. But in the meantime, they're using up so much space and they're not doing anything. It's driving me nuts. I wanted to share how the Swiss chard and the rainbow chard's looking. This one cabbage leaf is just kind of in the way. But from where I had trimmed them down, you can see that we're getting some more growth out of them. And that is really exciting to see. Here's that other plant, also getting some growth from the base. So this experiment looks like it's working out well. I'm not sure how well it'll tolerate through the whole summer, but if I can just get a couple of leaves off of it here and there to add into some meals, that would be just fine. This is the bit of corn. They say knee-high by the 4th of July. They are actually about my knee height. They just don't look super prolific. And this was another experiment, having them in this bed. This was just the bed that I had available when I was able to finally find some corn starts, and this bed stays pretty filtered sunshine as well. So it would have been really nice in hindsight to have the corn over in that bed where the garlic was. But normally this bed ends up being potatoes, and I hadn't quite decided if I was going to pull out all of the volunteering potatoes out of here or not at the time that I planted the garlic last fall. So it's all good things to note and remember for years in the future. This may be a good spot for garlic or something else. But in the meantime, I'm just keeping an eye on the corn. One other thing to share over here, this was a little, what do you call it? It's when you pull the tomato little crotch out, when you have a little start coming from the V of 2 tomato arms. One had kind of got away from me, and so I pulled it off and I stuck it right in the ground. And after a couple of days of it looking a little sad and trying to make some roots, it's actually looking pretty good. I don't know if it'll ever get tall enough to actually bear any fruit, but it's a fun experiment to do anyway. Just see if that does anything. Thank you guys for joining me today and seeing my end of June garden tour. I'll see you next month.